Before we embark on this incredible journey together, I have a small heartfelt request. Please subscribe to my channel, give this video a like, it costs you nothing but means the world to me. And let me know in the comments which beautiful corner of the world you're watching from. Your support truly makes a difference. The gavel came down with a sharp crack, and I watched my father sentence me to 3 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit. What he didn't know was that I had been recording everything from my phone, tucked discreetly in my jacket pocket. What he especially didn't know was that 30 minutes before my hearing, I had witnessed him stuffing an envelope thick with cash into his briefcase, cash that came from the prosecutor's assistant, handed over in the courthouse parking lot like they were trading baseball cards. I sat in that defendant's chair, looking up at Judge Harrison McKenzie, my own father, as he read my sentence with theatrical gravity. The same man who taught me to ride a bicycle. The same man who helped me with algebra homework at our kitchen table. The same man who was now destroying my life for money. "Ms. McKenzie," he said, not even acknowledging our shared name, "you have shown a complete disregard for the law and the safety of our community." My lawyer, a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, shifted uncomfortably beside me. The courtroom was nearly empty, just a few court staff, the prosecutor who had just paid my father off, and my sister Emma in the back row, crying quietly. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, about to start my 3rd year of law school at Northwestern, being sentenced by a corrupt judge who happened to be my father, the same father who used to lecture me about integrity and doing the right thing. As the bailiff approached to escort me away, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to prison, not for this, not when I had evidence of what really happened in that parking lot. I pressed the stop button on my phone's recording app and smiled at my father. He had no idea what was coming. The recording quality wasn't perfect, but it was good enough to destroy a career. 3 hours after my sentencing, I sat in Emma's Honda Civic in the parking lot of a Starbucks on Clark Street, playing back the audio on my phone. You could clearly hear my father's voice. "This better be the last payment, Rodriguez. I'm getting too old for this shit." "It will be, Your Honor. After tomorrow's sentencing, we're square." Emma gripped the steering wheel tighter. "Catherine, this is insane. That's Dad on that recording." "That's exactly who it is." I replayed the exchange again, making sure every word was clear. And he just sent his own daughter to prison for 3 years. The case against me was bullshit from the start. Embezzlement from the law firm where I worked part-time during school. Someone had been skimming money from client accounts for months, but when the FBI started investigating, suddenly all the digital evidence pointed to me. Forged signatures on withdrawal slips, fake email accounts in my name, a paper trail that looked convincing enough to fool a jury. What they didn't expect was for the case to land on my father's docket. Emma pulled out a cigarette, her hands shaking. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to report him." The words came out steadier than I felt. "To who? He's a federal judge, Kat. These people protect each other." She wasn't wrong. The federal judiciary was like a private club. Judges investigated judges. Prosecutors who built careers on convictions didn't exactly rush to admit they'd been working with corrupt officials. But I had something they didn't expect. A law student's obsession with procedure and a daughter's intimate knowledge of her father's weaknesses. I scrolled through my contacts and found the number I was looking for. Special Agent Patricia Reeves, FBI Public Corruption Unit. We'd met during a career fair at Northwestern. She seemed like the kind of person who wouldn't be impressed by titles or intimidated by federal judges. "I need to make copies of this recording," I said. "Multiple copies." Emma started the car. "Where are we going?" "FedEx on Michigan Avenue. Then we're going to visit some people." My phone rang as we pulled out of the parking lot. Unknown number. The voice on the other end was my father's clerk, Janet Morrison, whispering like she was in a confessional. "Catherine, your father wants to see you in his chambers. Now." I almost laughed. "I don't think that's a good idea, Janet. considering I'm supposed to be processing into federal prison right about now. He said it's urgent, something about your appeal. Appeal? I hadn't filed an appeal. My public defender had basically told me to accept the sentence and serve my time quietly. But my father didn't know that. Emma raised her eyebrows as I hung up. What was that about? Dad wants to meet. I think he's nervous. You're not seriously considering going? But I was, because nervous people make mistakes, and I needed him to make a big one. 20 minutes later, we pulled up to the Dirksen Federal Building. The afternoon sun reflected off its concrete facade like a mirror, and I could see security guards through the glass doors. Getting back inside without being arrested was going to be tricky. I called Janet back. I need you to meet me at the employee entrance on Jackson. And Janet, don't tell anyone I'm coming. Is everything okay, Catherine? You sound different. Different. That was one way to put it. 6 hours ago, I was a convicted felon. Now I was an investigator building a case against my own father. The employee entrance was quieter, just a single security guard who recognized me from the dozens of times I'd visited my father's chambers over the years. He waved me through without checking my ID. Janet met me at the elevator, her face pale. He's been pacing for an hour, keeps asking about transcripts and case files. What kind of transcripts? Your case. He wants to review everything before it goes to appeals court. The elevator climbed to the 17th floor, and I felt my stomach drop with each passing number. I'd been in these chambers hundreds of times. Family visits, bring your daughter to work days, college graduations celebrated with dinner in his private conference room. Now everything felt foreign. Janet led me down the familiar hallway, past portraits of former judges and American flags on brass poles. She knocked twice on the heavy oak door. Come in. My father stood behind his desk, still in his black robes. He looked older than I remembered. Gray stubble on his chin, reading glasses perched on his nose. When he saw me, something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe, or guilt. Catherine, sit down. I remained standing. You wanted to see me? He gestured toward the leather chairs across from his desk. The same chairs where we'd discussed my law school applications 3 years earlier, where he'd told me how proud he was that I wanted to follow in his footsteps. I've been thinking about your case, he said carefully. There might be grounds for appeal. Now I was curious. What kind of grounds? He walked to his window, looking out at the Chicago River. Procedural issues, evidence that might have been improperly obtained. I almost smiled. He was fishing, trying to figure out what I knew. My phone, still recording in my pocket, was about to capture the most important conversation of both our lives. He knew I had something on him. The question was, how much? What kind of procedural issues? I asked, settling into the leather chair but keeping my posture rigid. My father turned from the window, and for a moment I saw the man who used to read me bedtime stories. Then his judicial mask slipped back into place. The FBI's investigation may have overstepped some bounds. Warrants that weren't properly executed, chain of custody problems with digital evidence. All true. But none of it mattered if you had a judge in your pocket willing to overlook those problems. Which is exactly what had happened. Dad? The word felt strange in this formal setting. Why are you really asking me here? He sat down across from me, leaning forward like he used to when we had serious talks. Because you're my daughter, and I don't want to see you go to prison for something you didn't do. The admission hung in the air between us. He'd just confessed, on tape, that he knew I was innocent. Then why did you sentence me to 3 years? Because... He stopped, rubbing his temples. Because sometimes the system is bigger than what any one person can control. What system? The one where prosecutors pay judges to guarantee convictions? His face went white. Dead silence filled the chambers, broken only by the ticking of his grandfather clock and the distant sound of traffic 17 floors below. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. $30,000 in cash. Parking lot behind the courthouse. Rodriguez's assistant, handed it to you in a manila envelope at 2:47 p.m. He stood up so fast, his chair rolled backward into the credenza. Catherine, you need to be very careful about the accusations you make. Or what? You'll sentence me to more prison time? The door to his chambers opened, and Janet peeked in. Judge McKenzie, your 4:30 appointment is here. My father looked at his watch, then at me. We'll continue this conversation later. No, we won't. I stood up and walked toward the door, because I won't be available. Where are you going? I stopped at the threshold and turned back to him. One last look at the man who raised me, who taught me about justice and integrity, who had just sold both for $30,000. To do what you should have done 20 years ago. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I pressed the button for the lobby. My hands were shaking as I checked my phone. The recording app showed 43 minutes of conversation. In my pocket, I had enough evidence to destroy a federal judge's career. The only problem was that the federal judge was my father. The FBI field office on Roosevelt Road looked like every government building in Chicago. Concrete, glass, and institutional beige that sucked the life out of everything. Special Agent Patricia Reeves was exactly as I remembered her from the Northwestern Career Fair. Sharp gray suit, practical shoes, and the kind of direct eye contact that made you want to confess crimes you hadn't committed. She listened to my recording twice without interruption, making notes on a yellow legal pad. "How long has this been going on?" she asked, pausing the playback. "I don't know, but based on what my father said, it's been years." "And you're sure this is his voice?" I almost laughed. "I've been hearing that voice my entire life. It's him." She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Ms. McKenzie, you understand that if we move forward with this investigation, there's no going back. Your father will likely face federal charges: conspiracy, bribery, obstruction of justice. We're talking about 20 years minimum." 20 years. He was 68 years old. It would be a life sentence. "I understand. And you'll need to testify, in open court, against your own father." The weight of that settled on me like a lead blanket. I'd grown up in courtrooms, watching my father command respect from lawyers and defendants alike. The idea of sitting in the witness box, pointing at him in shackles, made my stomach turn. But then I thought about 3 years in federal prison for a crime I didn't commit. "I'll testify." Agent Reeves made another note. "We'll need to verify this recording, run voice analysis, check the metadata, and we'll need more evidence. One conversation isn't enough to build a case." "What kind of evidence?" "Financial records, bank statements, communication between your father and the prosecutor's office, other cases where similar patterns might have occurred." She stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. "Judge Harrison McKenzie. We've been watching him for 6 months." My heart stopped. "You've been investigating him?" Anonymous tip came in last spring. Someone reported seeing cash changing hands in the courthouse parking lot. We've had surveillance on him since May, but we could never get close enough to gather solid evidence. Until now. Until now. She sat back down, opening the folder. "Catherine, I want you to look at something." She spread out photographs across the desk, black and white surveillance shots of my father in various locations: the courthouse parking lot, a restaurant on Navy Pier, the lobby of the Palmer House Hotel. In each photo, he was with different men in expensive suits. "We've identified at least 12 cases where your father received payments before rendering verdicts. Drug trafficking, white-collar fraud, racketeering, all guilty verdicts, all maximum sentences." I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile the man I knew with the criminal staring back at me from these images. "Why didn't you arrest him sooner?" "Because federal judges are nearly impossible to prosecute. The evidence has to be ironclad, and the corruption has to be systematic and provable. Your recording gives us the missing piece." She closed the folder and looked at me directly. "But I have to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Are you doing this for justice, or are you doing this for revenge? The question hit me harder than I expected. Was I? Was this about protecting other innocent defendants, or was it about punishing the man who betrayed me? I don't know, I said finally. Maybe both. That's honest. But Catherine, if we move forward, you need to be prepared for what comes next. She handed me a business card with her direct number. Go home. Think about it. If you decide to proceed, call me tomorrow morning. I walked out of the FBI building into the late afternoon Chicago air, feeling like I was carrying the weight of my father's entire career in my pocket. Emma was waiting in her car, engine running. How did it go? I think I just became a federal informant. She pulled away from the curb, heading toward my apartment in Lincoln Park. Neither of us spoke for several blocks. Finally, she broke the silence. Are you sure about this? I watched the city pass by through the passenger window. People heading home from work, parents picking up kids from school, normal people living normal lives without having to choose between family and justice. Ask me tomorrow. I didn't sleep that night, but I did make a list. Sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, I wrote down every case I could remember where my father had acted strangely. Late-night phone calls, unusual meetings, cases where the verdicts seemed harsher than the crimes warranted. The Johnson case from 2 years ago, a first-time drug offender who got 15 years for possession with intent to distribute. I remembered my father being unusually tense during that trial, snapping at his clerk over minor scheduling issues. The Petrov embezzlement case from last spring, a small business owner who stole $40,000 to pay for his daughter's cancer treatment. My father gave him the maximum sentence despite letters from dozens of community members asking for leniency. By dawn, I had 17 cases that felt wrong. My phone rang at 6:30 a.m. Emma. Any regrets? She asked without preamble. Hundreds, but I'm still calling Agent Reeves. I figured. I'm coming over. She arrived with bagels and the Morning Tribune, spreading both on my kitchen counter like we were having a normal sister breakfast instead of planning to destroy our father's life. Page 3, she said, pointing to a small article buried in the Metro section. Federal judge under investigation for alleged corruption. The byline was Patricia Chen, Tribune staff writer. The article was vague. Anonymous sources, ongoing investigation, no comment from the court system. But it was enough to confirm what I already knew. My father was about to become front-page news. I called Agent Reeves at 8:00 a.m. sharp. I'm in. Are you sure? I'm sure. Good. Can you come in this morning? We need to get started immediately. The FBI office was busier than it had been the day before. Agents hurried past with files and coffee cups, phones ringing constantly. Agent Reeves led me to a different conference room, this one with no windows and recording equipment set up on the table. We're going to start with a formal statement, she said, adjusting the microphones. Everything you remember about your father's behavior, your case, the meeting in his chambers. Take your time and be as detailed as possible. For the next 3 hours, I talked. About growing up as a judge's daughter, about the pressure to be perfect, to never embarrass the family name, about law school and my part-time job at Kellner and Associates, about the day FBI agents knocked on my apartment door with an arrest warrant. Agent Reeves took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly letting me talk. Tell me about the money, she said when I finished. What money? Your father's lifestyle. Did you ever notice anything unusual? Expensive purchases he couldn't afford on a judge's salary? I thought about it. The lake house in Wisconsin he'd bought 3 years ago, the new BMW, the first-class tickets to Italy last Christmas. He said he'd been investing well, stock market. Federal judges make $180,000 a year. Even with good investments, that doesn't usually cover lake houses and European vacations. She was right. I'd never thought about it before, but the math didn't add up. We're going to need you to wear a wire, she said, changing direction abruptly. A wire? We need more evidence. Contemporary evidence. You're going to call your father and arrange another meeting. The thought of sitting across from him again, this time with FBI recording equipment taped to my chest, made me feel sick. What am I supposed to say? That you've been thinking about what he said, that you want to discuss the appeal, see if he'll say more about the systemic problems he mentioned. She handed me a small device that looked like a button. This goes inside your shirt, against your skin. It'll pick up everything within 15 feet. I held the tiny recorder, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to bring down such a big man. When? Today. This afternoon. The longer we wait, the more likely it is that he'll figure out what's happening. I looked at the device again, then at Agent Reeves. What if he doesn't say anything incriminating? Then we keep trying until he does. Outside, Chicago was having one of those perfect October days. Blue sky, crisp air, leaves just starting to turn. I sat in Emma's car in the FBI parking lot, the wire taped uncomfortably under my bra, and called my father's chambers. Janet answered on the second ring. Judge McKenzie's office. Janet, it's Catherine. Is he available? Oh, Catherine, I'm so glad you called. He's been asking about you all morning. Of course he had. He was probably terrified that I was sitting in a federal building somewhere, telling investigators everything I knew, which, as it turned out, was exactly what I was doing. The wire felt like it was burning a hole through my chest as I walked back into the Dirksen Federal Building. My father was waiting for me in his chambers, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal. He'd changed out of his robes into a navy suit, but he still looked every inch the federal judge, commanding, authoritative, used to being the most important person in any room. Catherine, thank you for coming. I sat down in the same leather chair as yesterday, hyper-aware of the recording device against my skin. 15 feet, Agent Reeves had said. I needed to stay close. You mentioned an appeal yesterday, I said, getting straight to the point. He nodded, walking to his bookshelf and pulling out a thick volume of federal case law. I've been researching precedents. There are several grounds we could pursue. Such as? Fourth Amendment violations during the search of your apartment. The FBI's warrant was overly broad and they seized materials outside the scope of their authorization. This was true. The FBI had taken my entire computer, my phone, every document in my filing cabinet, far more than what was specified in the warrant. A good defense attorney could have challenged the search, but my public defender hadn't bothered. Why didn't you rule on that during the trial? I asked. He set the book down and looked at me directly. Because I couldn't appear to be giving you special treatment. The optics would have been terrible. Optics. Not justice. Not truth. Optics. So you were willing to send me to prison to protect your reputation? I was trying to protect both of us. He sat down across from me, leaning forward earnestly. Catherine, there are things you don't understand about how the system works. Then explain it to me. He was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. Sometimes judges face pressure to rule certain ways on certain cases. What kind of pressure? Political pressure, financial pressure, personal pressure. The wire felt like it was getting hotter. I needed him to be more specific. Dad, I'm facing 3 years in federal prison. I need you to be clearer about what you mean. He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the river. The Justice Department has quotas, Catherine, conviction rates they expect prosecutors to maintain, and prosecutors know which judges are accommodating to their needs. Accommodating how? By not questioning evidence too closely, by accepting plea bargains that might be questionable, by imposing sentences that send messages to other potential defendants. I felt like I was pulling teeth, but he was getting closer to what Agent Reeves needed. And if judges aren't accommodating, then cases stop coming to their dockets. Their colleagues start avoiding them. Their opportunities for advancement disappear. He turned back to face me. And sometimes the pressure becomes more direct. My heart was racing. What do you mean by direct? I mean that sometimes people offer incentives for judges to see things their way. What kind of incentives? The silence stretched between us. I could hear my pulse in my ears and wondered if the wire was picking up the sound of my heartbeat. Financial incentives, he said finally. There it was. Not quite a confession, but close enough. How often does this happen? More often than you'd think. Less often than the media would have you believe. How often has it happened to you? He walked back to his desk and sat down heavily. For the first time since I'd arrived, he looked his age, tired, defeated, worn down by decades of compromises and justifications. Catherine, there are things I've done that I'm not proud of. Decisions I've made that have kept me awake at night. Including my case? Especially your case. The admission hung in the air between us. I had him. Agent Reeves had her evidence. I should have felt victorious, but instead I felt hollow. So what happens now? I asked. Now we file your appeal and hope that cooler heads prevail. I stood up to leave. And what about the other defendants, the ones who didn't have a judge for a father? He didn't answer, but I could see in his face that he understood what I was really asking. As I reached for the door handle, he called my name. Catherine? Yes. I love you. I hope you know that. I looked back at him one last time, this man who had taught me right from wrong, who had inspired me to pursue law, who had just confessed to selling justice for cash. I love you too, Dad. That's why this is so hard. The recording was even clearer than the first one, but Agent Reeves wanted more. He's being careful, she said, playing back my father's words about financial incentives for the third time. He's admitting to systemic corruption, but not explicitly confessing to taking bribes himself. We were back in the windowless conference room at the FBI office. It was 6:30 p.m., and the building was starting to empty out. I could hear janitors in the hallway, vacuum cleaners humming against carpet. What more do you need? Specifics, names, dates, amounts. We need him to admit to taking money in exchange for specific verdicts. I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache building behind my eyes. He's not going to just confess. He's been a judge for 20 years. He knows how to avoid saying anything directly incriminating. Then we need to force his hand. Agent Reeves opened a new folder and spread out bank records across the table. We've been tracking your father's finances. Look at this. She pointed to a series of deposits into his personal checking account. $15,000 in March, $20,000 in June, $30,000 just 3 days before my sentencing. All cash deposits, all made at different branches of Northern Trust Bank throughout the city. The timing corresponds with major case verdicts, she said. The Petrov embezzlement case, the Johnson drug case, your case. Every time he issues a harsh sentence in a high-profile prosecution, money appears in his account within 48 hours. I stared at the numbers, adding them up in my head. Over $200,000 in unexplained cash deposits in the past year alone. How is he explaining this to the IRS? Gifts from relatives, investment returns. He's been creative. What do you need me to do? She leaned back in her chair, studying me. We need you to confront him with this information. See how he reacts when he knows we have his financial records. He'll know I'm working with you. Yes, and that's when he'll either shut down completely or try to negotiate. Either way, we'll learn something useful. The idea of revealing myself as an FBI informant to my father made my stomach turn. Once I did that, there would be no relationship left to salvage. No Christmas dinners, no birthday calls, no pretending we were still family. There's something else, Agent Reeves said, pulling out another document. We've identified the source of the payments. She showed me a series of wire transfer records from an account belonging to Rodriguez and Associates, the prosecutor's office that had handled my case. They're not just paying your father, they're running a systematic operation, buying verdicts from at least 3 federal judges in the Northern District of Illinois. 3 judges, dozens of cases, hundreds of defendants who had been railroaded by a system that was supposed to protect them. How long has this been going on? At least 5 years, possibly longer. I thought about all the defendants who had stood before my father's bench, believing they were getting a fair trial. The drug dealers and embezzlers and tax evaders who had received maximum sentences, not because justice demanded it, but because prosecutors had paid for it. "I'll do it," I said. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." She handed me a new wire, smaller and more sophisticated than the previous one. "This one has a panic button," she said, showing me a tiny switch. "If you feel like you're in any danger, press it and we'll come in immediately." "You think he might hurt me?" "I think desperate people do desperate things, and your father is about to become very desperate." I drove home through the dark Chicago streets, the weight of the wire and the panic button pressing against my chest like a physical reminder of the choice I had made. At a red light on Lakeshore Drive, I called my father's cell phone. "Catherine, it's late. Is everything okay?" "I need to see you. Tonight." "Can it wait until tomorrow? I have an early morning." "No, Dad, it can't wait." There was a pause. In the background, I could hear classical music and the sound of ice clinking in a glass. "Where do you want to meet?" "Your house, in an hour." Another pause. "Catherine, you're scaring me." "Good," I said, and hung up. The suburban streets of Wilmette were quiet at 9 p.m., lined with oak trees and brick colonials, where normal families were watching TV and helping kids with homework. My father's house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a modest 2-story that he'd bought after my mother died 5 years ago. I sat in my car for a moment, looking at the warm light in his living room windows. This was the house where Emma and I spent alternate weekends after the divorce, where we'd had Christmas mornings and birthday parties and graduation celebrations. After tonight, I would never be welcome here again. My father answered the door in a cardigan and reading glasses, looking more like a retired professor than a federal judge. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. "Can I get you something? Coffee? Wine?" "Just answers." He led me into his study, a room lined with law books and family photos, pictures of Emma and me at various ages, soccer games, school plays, college graduations, watched from mahogany frames as I prepared to destroy his life. He settled into his leather recliner while I remained standing. The wire felt warm against my skin. "What did you want to discuss?" I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo Agent Reeves had given me, one of his bank statements, the series of cash deposits highlighted in yellow. His face went completely white. "Where did you get that?" "The FBI." The words hit him like a physical blow. He set down his whiskey glass with shaking hands and stared at me. "Catherine, what have you done?" "What have I done? Dad, you took bribes to send innocent people to prison, including your own daughter." "You don't understand." "Then explain it to me," I was shouting now, months of anger and betrayal pouring out. "Explain how you justified taking money to destroy people's lives." He stood up and walked to his window, looking out at his dark backyard. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. It started small. "Rodriguez offered me season tickets to the Cubs in exchange for being reasonable on sentencing recommendations. Nothing major, just considering the prosecution's perspective. Season tickets led to cash payments. It escalated. Rodriguez said his clients appreciated judges who understood the importance of public safety, who weren't soft on crime. His clients? Business owners who'd been victims of embezzlement, families who'd lost children to drug dealers, people who wanted to see justice done. I almost believed him for a moment. The way he told it, he wasn't taking bribes. He was serving victims, protecting the community, making sure dangerous criminals got the punishment they deserved. What about the innocent ones, Dad? What about me? He turned from the window, tears in his eyes. I tried to protect you. I fought Rodriguez on your case for weeks. By sentencing me to 3 years in prison? By keeping you out of maximum security. Rodriguez wanted 5 years, federal penitentiary. I negotiated it down to minimum security, possibility of early release. The casual way he discussed my life like a business transaction made me sick. How much did he pay you for my conviction? Catherine, please. How much? $30,000. There it was. The price of a judge's integrity. The cost of sending his own daughter to prison. How many others were there? He sat back down heavily. I don't know. Dozens. Maybe more. Over how long? 3 years, since Rodriguez made partner at his firm. And the other judges? Patterson and Williams? His head snapped up. How do you know about them? The FBI has been investigating all of you. They know everything. He was quiet for a long moment, processing what I'd told him. When he looked up, there was something different in his eyes, not remorse, but calculation. Catherine, if you cooperate with this investigation, you'll destroy more than just my career. You'll destroy the entire Northern District, 3 federal judges, dozens of prosecutors, hundreds of cases that will need to be overturned. Good. Innocent people will go free. Criminals who deserve to be in prison will walk out. Some of them, yes, but so will the innocent people you helped convict. And you think that's worth it? You think bringing down the system is worth letting murderers and drug dealers back on the street? I looked at him. This man who had taught me about right and wrong, who had inspired me to pursue law, who was now trying to justify corruption by wrapping it in the flag of public safety. I think justice is worth it, I said. Even when it's messy, even when it's inconvenient. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer, but hoped he wouldn't hear it. So, what happens now? Now you have a choice. You can cooperate with the FBI investigation, help them identify all the cases where you took payments, and hope for leniency when you're sentenced. And if I don't? I pressed the panic button on my wire, then immediately released it. A signal to Agent Reeves that I was okay, but wanted backup nearby. Then they'll keep investigating until they have enough evidence to convict you anyway, and you'll spend the rest of your life in federal prison. He looked around his study, at the law books that had guided his career, at the family photos that showed what he was about to lose, at the comfortable life he'd built with blood money. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow morning. I walked toward the door, then stopped and turned back to him one last time. For what it's worth, Dad, I really did look up to you once. The call came at 6:47 a.m., waking me from the first real sleep I'd had in days. Catherine, it's Agent Reeves. Your father's attorney just contacted us. He wants to make a deal. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. What kind of deal? Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence recommendation. He's ready to give us everything. Names, dates, case numbers, financial records, the whole operation. Emma rolled over beside me, squinting at the clock. I'd been staying at her apartment since the FBI investigation began, afraid to be alone in case my father tried to contact me. How reduced are we talking? That depends on how much he gives us and how useful it is. But Catherine, there's something else. He specifically requested that you be present when he makes his statement. My stomach dropped. Why? I don't know. His attorney just said it was important to him that you hear what he has to say. 2 hours later, I was back in the FBI building, sitting in a different conference room with Agent Reeves and 2 other investigators I hadn't met before. My father arrived at 9 o'clock a.m. sharp with his attorney, a sharp-featured woman in an expensive suit who looked like she charged by the minute. He had aged years in the past week. His hair looked thinner, his face gaunt, his usually perfect posture stooped with defeat. When he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. Catherine? Dad? We sat across from each other at the long conference table, like opposing armies negotiating a ceasefire. His attorney spread out several manila folders while Agent Reeves set up recording equipment. Before we begin, his attorney said, I want it on record that my client is cooperating voluntarily in hopes of receiving consideration during sentencing. Agent Reeves nodded. Understood. Judge McKenzie, please state your name for the record. Harrison James McKenzie, United States District Judge for the Northern District of Illinois. And you understand that this statement is being recorded and may be used in criminal proceedings against you and others? I understand. Agent Reeves opened her notepad. Tell us how this started. My father looked at me, then at his hands. 3 years ago, I was assigned to preside over the Rodriguez drug trafficking case. Miguel Rodriguez, nephew of Prosecutor Fernando Rodriguez, it was a major case, 30 kilograms of cocaine, distribution network spanning 3 states. He paused, gathering himself. Fernando approached me at a judicial conference in Springfield. Said his family was grateful for judges who understood that some cases were about more than just individual defendants, that they were about sending messages to the criminal community. What did he mean by that? He meant he wanted his nephew to get the maximum sentence, and he was willing to pay for it. How much? $50,000, cash, delivered to my home in a gift box supposedly containing wine. Agent Reeves made a note. And you accepted? I told myself it wasn't about the money, that I would have given Rodriguez's nephew the maximum sentence anyway because of the scope of his operation. The money was just gratitude. I felt sick listening to him rationalize taking bribes as some kind of public service. But it didn't stop there, Agent Reeves prompted. No, Rodriguez came back a month later with another case, then another. Each time the payments got larger and the cases got more questionable. Questionable how? Defendants who maybe deserved lighter sentences. First-time offenders, people who were clearly small fish in larger operations. He opened one of his folders and pulled out a handwritten list. I documented every case where I accepted payment, 47 cases over 3 years. Total of $800,000. The number hung in the air like a physical weight, $800,000, the price of 47 people's freedom. What about Catherine's case? Agent Reeves asked gently. My father's voice broke. That was the worst one. Rodriguez said the FBI needed a high-profile conviction to justify their investigation of the law firm. Someone who looked credible, who would generate media attention. And you agreed to frame your own daughter? I didn't agree to frame her. He looked at me desperately. The evidence against you was legitimate, Catherine. The forged signatures, the fake email accounts. Rodriguez showed me everything the FBI had collected. Evidence that Rodriguez manufactured, I said quietly. He nodded miserably. I didn't know that at the time. I convinced myself that you had made a mistake, that you were young and stupid and deserved a second chance after serving your time. So you took $30,000 to give me that second chance? I took $30,000 to keep you out of maximum security prison, he shouted, then immediately looked ashamed of his outburst. The room was silent, except for the hum of the recording equipment and the distant sound of traffic outside. Are there other judges involved? Agent Reeves asked. Patterson and Williams, same operation, different prosecutors. We never discussed it among ourselves, but we all knew. How many cases total? Over 100, maybe more. 100 cases. 100 defendants who had been railroaded by judges who were supposed to protect them. My father looked at me across the table. Catherine, I know you'll never forgive me. I don't expect you to. But I want you to know that every night for the past 3 years, I've gone to bed thinking about the people I've hurt, including you. Especially you. Then why didn't you stop? Because I was weak. And because Rodriguez made it clear that if I tried to back out, he would destroy me. He had recordings, photographs, bank records. I was trapped. You were corrupt, I corrected. There's a difference. He nodded, accepting the judgment. Yes, I was corrupt. Agent Reeves closed her notepad. Judge McKenzie, you understand that based on this statement, we'll be recommending charges of conspiracy, bribery, and obstruction of justice? I understand. And you're prepared to testify against Rodriguez and the other judges? Yes. She stood up. We'll need you to surrender your passport and remain available for questioning over the next several weeks. My father nodded and gathered his papers. As he stood to leave, he looked at me one last time. I'm sorry, Catherine, for all of it. I watched him walk out of the conference room, knowing it would be the last time I saw him as a free man. 6 months later, I sat in federal court watching my father plead guilty to conspiracy and bribery charges. The courtroom was packed with reporters, legal observers, and victims of the corruption scandal. I recognized some of the faces from newspaper photos, defendants who had been railroaded, families who had lost loved ones to harsh sentences bought and paid for by prosecutors seeking career advancement. Judge Patricia Chen, brought in from the Eastern District to handle the case, looked down at my father with undisguised disgust. Judge McKenzie, in accepting these plea agreements, you have admitted to one of the most extensive corruption schemes in the history of the federal judiciary. You have betrayed your oath, violated the trust of the American people, and perverted the very concept of justice. My father stood with his head bowed, wearing the same Navy suit he'd worn to hundreds of hearings where he'd been the one dispensing judgment. Do you have anything to say before I impose sentence? He looked up at Judge Chen, then back at the packed courtroom. Your Honor, I have spent my entire adult life in service to the law. I became a judge because I believed in justice, in the rule of law, in the idea that our courts could be a force for good in the world. His voice was steady, but quiet, lacking the commanding authority I remembered from my childhood. I failed in that mission. I allowed greed and fear to cloud my judgment, and in doing so, I became the very thing I had sworn to fight against. I have no excuse for my actions, and I accept full responsibility for the harm I have caused. He turned slightly, and his eyes found mine in the gallery. Most importantly, I failed as a father. I sentenced my own daughter to prison for a crime I knew she didn't commit. No punishment this court imposes could be greater than knowing I betrayed the person who trusted me most. Judge Chen consulted her notes. Judge McKenzie, the government has recommended a sentence of 8 to 10 years based on your cooperation in this investigation. However, the scope of your crimes and the damage you have caused to public confidence in our judicial system demands a stronger response. Count check, 9,203 words so far. She looked directly at him. You are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to forfeit $800,000 in criminal proceeds and pay restitution to affected defendants in amounts to be determined by future proceedings. The gavel came down with the same sharp crack I remembered from my own sentencing. But this time, I felt no satisfaction, only a hollow sadness for what might have been. As the bailiffs led him away, my father looked back at me one more time. I didn't wave or nod or give him any sign of forgiveness. I just watched until he disappeared through the door that led to the holding cells. Emma squeezed my hand. How do you feel? Empty. Outside the courthouse, Agent Reeves was giving a press conference to a crowd of reporters. She outlined the scope of the corruption investigation. 3 federal judges, 7 prosecutors, 127 cases under review, 89 convictions already overturned. This investigation demonstrates that our justice system, while strong, is not immune to corruption, she said. But it also demonstrates that when corruption is exposed, the system can correct itself. A reporter shouted a question. What role did Judge McKenzie's daughter play in the investigation? Ms. McKenzie provided crucial evidence that allowed us to build this case. Her courage in coming forward, despite the personal cost, helped us protect the integrity of our federal courts. Courage. That wasn't how it felt. It felt like betrayal and necessity and heartbreak all rolled into one impossible choice. Later that evening, I sat in my apartment, my own apartment now, not Emma's couch, reading the news coverage of the sentencing. The headlines were brutal. Corrupt judge gets 12 years. Federal court cleanup continues. The judge who sold justice. My phone rang. Northwestern Law School, according to the caller ID. Catherine, this is Dean Morrison. I wanted to check on you after today's sentencing. Dean Morrison had been supportive throughout the investigation, allowing me to take a leave of absence during my final year and helping me navigate the media attention that came with being the daughter of a corrupt federal judge. I'm okay, I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. I have some news that might interest you. The Department of Justice has reached out to our office. They're looking for law students to join a new task force reviewing cases affected by the corruption investigation. What kind of review? Identifying defendants who may have been wrongly convicted or received excessive sentences, preparing recommendations for sentence reductions or new trials, essentially trying to undo the damage your father and the others caused. The irony wasn't lost on me. My father had corrupted the system. Now I was being asked to help fix it. It would be unpaid, but you'd receive credit toward your degree. And Catherine? Dean Morrison paused. It would be meaningful work, a chance to turn something terrible into something constructive. I looked out my window at the Chicago skyline, lights twinkling in the darkness. Somewhere out there were people serving prison sentences they didn't deserve. Families torn apart by a justice system that had been bought and sold like a commodity. When do I start? 1 year later, I stood in another federal courtroom, but this time I was on the other side of the bench. Your Honor, the defense moves for immediate release of Mr. Marcus Johnson based on newly discovered evidence of judicial misconduct in his original trial. Judge Patricia Chen, who had sentenced my father, was now hearing the case I had helped prepare, one of 47 cases we had identified where corruption had led to wrongful convictions or excessive sentences. Marcus Johnson sat at the defendant's table, a small, nervous man who had been serving a 15-year sentence for drug possession. The same case where my father had received his first payment from Rodriguez. The same case where I had learned that justice could be bought for $50,000. Motion granted, Judge Chen said. Mr. Johnson, you are hereby released from custody immediately. The court apologizes for the injustice you have suffered. I watched Marcus Johnson hug his lawyer, tears streaming down his face as he realized he was finally free after 3 years of wrongful imprisonment. His family rushed from the gallery to embrace him, their joy tempered by the knowledge of the time they could never get back. Outside the courthouse, Marcus approached me as I packed up my files. "You're the judge's daughter, aren't you?" he asked quietly. I tensed, expecting anger or accusation. Instead, he extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply, "for doing what was right." I shook his hand, feeling the weight of his gratitude and forgiveness. "I'm sorry for what happened to you." "Your father did wrong," he said, "but you made it right. That matters." As I walked back to my car, my phone buzzed with a text from Agent Reeves. "Conviction overturned in the Peterson case. That makes 89. Good work." 89 people whose lives had been restored because I had found the courage to record my father taking a bribe. 89 families who had been given back their loved ones. It didn't erase the harm that had been done, but it was something. I thought about my father, serving his sentence in a federal prison in Indiana. We hadn't spoken since his sentencing, and I didn't know if we ever would. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, even when you understand them. But I had learned something important through all of this. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about protection. It's about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves, even when doing so costs you everything you thought you wanted, especially then. My final lesson for you, watching from wherever you are. Sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who taught us right from wrong, and sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to let them continue hurting others. Honor isn't inherited. It's earned, one difficult choice at a time. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to do the right thing, no matter how much it costs. And let me know in the comments, what would you have done in my situation? Catherine McKenzie.